very, very much appreciative of our panelists who are with us today. So let me do a quick introduction and we'll move on from there. My name's Kurt Westmoreland. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at FlexRay. I've been involved in the food safety industry for many years, and I probably know a lot of you guys on the call here. Very, very much appreciate you guys being here. Our first panelist is Jeremiah Johnson. Jeremiah is the Assistant Director of Food Safety at Hormel Foods, where he's responsible for implementing and training sanitation and regulatory compliance and food safety expectations for both USDA and FDA regulated facilities. He's also a preventive control lead instructor for both human and animal food. And he's worked at Hormel for 19 years, and his previous roles have included management of QA departments at a dry sausage production facility in Iowa, pork slaughter and further processed facility in California. Jeremiah has a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from Iowa State University. So Jeremiah, thanks a lot for joining us. Our second panelist, Matt Thomas. Matt currently serves as the Senior Director of SQF at Tyson Foods, overseeing the food service and retail value-added poultry division. Matt spent over 20 years at Tyson and holds an MS in food safety from the University of Arkansas. Matt, thank you. Appreciate it. And our third panelist is Brian Armentrout. Brian served as the Vice President of Quality Assurance for a major U.S. CPG company, and now he serves as President of the Food Leadership Group Consultancy. Brian has over 20 years experience serving corporate clients in the food manufacturing with quality systems, auditing, and training sectors. So Brian, thank you. Really appreciate you being here.
You bet. Thanks, Kurt.
All right. So just a little bit of housekeeping as we move forward with this thing. It's going to be a roundtable format. So you have an option to send in questions or comments as we go through this, and we'll be collecting those. And as we get toward the end of this, we'll certainly try to save some time so that we can answer those questions. So if you'll do that, through the comments box in both the webinar tool and or on LinkedIn, if you'd prefer to do it that way, and then we'll take care of the Q&A at the end. So as we get into this, what I'd like to do is have all the panelists give just a little bit of information outside of the bio on what their day-to-day responsibilities are. So, Matt, I see you're in the upper left-hand corner. Let's start with you. So, tell me just a little bit about the types of facilities that you're overseeing, the roles and responsibilities that you've got there, and really how your FSQA structure is organized a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kurt, and thank you for having us on today. Again, for the team, my name is Matt Thomas, the Senior Director of FSQA at Tyson Foods. I oversee, from an FSQA food safety regulatory quality standpoint, all of the ready-to-eat poultry at Tyson Foods, as well as a significant amount of our national account customer, par fry operations, and then harvest, debone, and portioning facilities. So a lot of further processed poultry, and like I said, all the ready-to-eat poultry within Tyson Foods. In terms of roles and responsibilities, just everything from the regulatory landscape all the way down to product quality in our organization and in the 20 locations that I oversee, inclusive of product specification compliance, anything in the regulatory realm, and then a lot of meeting our customers' needs in terms of individual interaction with them as a group or a national account QSR or retail body. A lot of customer interaction there. And then from an FSQA org structure, I report to the Vice President of Poultry, FSQA. We have one overarching Senior Vice President for all of FSQA that covers beef, pork, prepared foods, and poultry. And then I have 4 associate directors that work on my team who each one of the 20 location plant FSQA managers report to. So lucky to have a great team of 20 locations and 4 associate directors that do the heavy lifting and make my job a whole lot easier probably than it should be with a lot of qualified folks. So.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And let me apologize. When I first introduced you, I think I said Senior Director of SQF, so I apologize for that.
Well, we get a little bit of that too, so everything's fine.
A little bit of help, right? All right. All right. So, Jeremiah, I think you're next on the screen there. So, if you'll do the same, tell us a little about the type of facilities you're overseeing, roles and responsibilities, and then kind of how the FSQA organization is structured there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kurt, and happy to be here. Hi, everyone. My name's Jeremiah Johnson, and I oversee food safety for our entire enterprise. So that would be, we have some of our brands that you might recognize. We have the Jennie-O Turkey Store brand. So we have poultry, slaughter, and further processing. We have the Planters brand. So we have nuts and mixed nuts and all that fun stuff too. We have Holy Guacamole, Herdez. We have, and then we also have a lot of value-added pork, pork, a primary focus of ours as well. But I oversee the food safety plan development for all of those processes. I have a sanitation team that I oversee as well, along with a regulatory team that all kind of roll up through me. And how we are set up is a little bit different. So our corporate structure is we kind of divide out food safety and quality and process control into two separate areas. And then I have that food safety side, which is why you have the sanitation, regulatory, and all of those pieces of that puzzle that fall up through me.
Great. Appreciate it. And Brian, last but not least.
What do I do?
So Brian's a little bit different. He's not in a facility now. He's been in there before, and I know you've worked with multiple customers. And but in the type of position you've got now, Brian, with the consulting and in your live chat that you do. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how you work with FSQA organizations and companies through that.
Yeah, absolutely, Kurt. So part of what I do is really taking my experience and knowledge and helping people hopefully not make the same mistakes I made in my career. So what are the good practices and programs, mainly in FDA food regulated operations? So I come in and help people set up quality systems, investigate issues, help with crisis management, all those type of fun things to make sure that, just like Matt and Jeremiah are doing, that people are getting safe, wholesome food that everybody enjoys every time, and we all eat. And so I'm very happy with this team of people who make that possible for all of us. So that's kind of what I do.
Great. Awesome. Well, good deal. Now we'll get a little bit definitely into the heart of the conversation here. And Jeremiah, I'd like to start with you. In terms of what we can do to prevent foreign material from really getting into and making it through the process. Where do you see the most potential risk for foreign material incidents occurring in the process?
Ooh, thanks for that question, Kurt. Well, I think right off the bat, the initial reaction I have is risk exists everywhere in our process. Unfortunately, I think all of you are on this call because it's something that you are dealing with and living with on a regular occurrence, and it happens. I think the biggest source of foreign material is probably our processing equipment and the materials are used. There's opportunities throughout that entire process for it to enter, and it most likely will come from those two sources. Is kind of where we see it the most. I think when it comes to risk, I think an important part of the conversation needs to be understanding the risk associated with your process and accomplishing that by conducting a very thorough risk assessment. Obviously, the HACCP process naturally leads to some of that for us, through that hazard analysis and taking into consider physical contamination. But outside of food safety hazards, there's still risk for adulteration. So you do need to take it to that next step and understand where the risk is in your process. And part of that needs to be understanding past history of occurrences, what has happened in the past, but also you need to understand where that potential exists. So that risk assessment regarding your process is absolutely critical.
Okay. Great. And all of you who are attending and listening today, if you've got other examples from where that you've had foreign material introduced into your process, feel free to put those in the comments because it'll be really good information for the rest of the crowd here. to understand that. Matthew, the next question will be for you. There's been a lot of discussion, over the last, little bit in food safety about having a multiple hurdle approach when it comes to food safety. How do you guys apply that type of a multiple hurdle approach at Tyson?
Yeah, I think the first thing when you think about multiple hurdle with foreign material is you have to come to terms with the idea that detection equipment or technology is not going to be the sole solution. Mm-hmm. And so that multiple hurdle approach gives you the opportunity to take many swings at the problem throughout your process. And so it's very, very easy to get caught up in the idea that a metal detector or an X-ray or vision or whatever the flavor of the month is with technology is going to save you and cure all of your ills in the process. The reality is we have a lot of opportunities across the different parts of our process to impact the foreign material equation. And so much like many of us have experienced multiple hurdle with pathogens over time in terms of that load reduction as we move forward in our process, we have the ability to do the same thing with foreign material. And really going back to what Jeremiah talked about with that risk, we have a lot of opportunity to impact and lower that risk coefficient at various parts in our process. And it could be as easy as a multiple hurdle being, we still have our detection equipment or technology in our process. We have other things as well. We have magnets, we have sieves, we have grates and screens. We have different inspection protocols and different parts of the process where we can slow down or speed up to really utilize what the process is giving us to our advantage. And so never underestimate the power of the length of time it takes to process material. The other thing I would say about multiple hurdle is not to discount the fact or the idea of a good plan to start, right? With supplier approval, equipment sanitation, preventative maintenance, and all those things that may not be necessarily physical that you can lay your hand on in your process, but a good plan is worth its weight.
Okay, great. And it's a really good segue to the next question I had. And the next one is actually still for you, Jeremiah. Brian, you're coming up next. But for Jeremiah, it's like, talk a little bit about, because Matt was talking about, different types of technologies and inline technologies. Talk a little bit about, inline X-ray detection technology and, what's important to know about the technology and what you got and how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, I love how you said about the multiple parts of the equation, though, and it's not just the inline detection. That's not our sole intervention when it comes to foreign material. There's foreign material prevention. There's so many components that go into a robust and effective program. But when it comes specifically to detection technology, one of the things that at Hormel that we've really focused on, and it doesn't matter if it's X-ray or metal detection or vision or any type of technology that you have, but you have to understand the capabilities of it. You have to understand what it is detecting to and how well it's performing. So there's a couple of key phrases that if you haven't heard of, I think that would be a good takeaway to investigate and working with your vendors on this. And those are probability of detection and false reject rate. When you are setting up your process and your detection capabilities, you have to understand how it's performing in regards to those two. So probability detection, how accurate can it get? How, if it's an X-ray, how small, or detection, how small can it detect? And then false reject is how accurate is it? How many times is it going to give you a false detection? If your equipment is giving you excessive false detections, then your operators are going to lose the confidence in that equipment. So you have to have that balance. You have to detect as good as you can, but you want every single detection to count. So understanding what the capabilities are and what, so when you do have those events, you know true if your internal controls are going to address it.
Great. And those are the same type things that we here at FlexRay see a lot, because people will ask us, what does it mean with our inline detection? How does the inline detection system compare to what you guys are doing when you utilize you guys? So Brian, based on the work that you've done with your clients, how do you, based on the stuff that you've done, how have you recommended or have you seen that maybe they do some calibration of the inline equipment that they're using, especially when you're thinking about it from a risk-based approach standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely, Kurt, and really good comments, and everybody in the comment section here, fantastic information that's coming in here of your different sources of foreign material. Part of this, I think, and this is being woven through the comments that we're talking about here today, is the people aspect. You just can't install a piece of equipment and say, okay, I've done my job and walk away. Part of this, that calibration piece, and this is from my experience, Kurt, is working really closely with your engineering team or your maintenance team or whoever is responsible for speccing out and purchasing that equipment to begin with. You need to understand, especially like in metal detectors, what's the aperture size, what type of product is going to be going through this. You just can't take a metal detector from a line that's going at twice the speed of the line you're putting on a new line and say, okay, that's good enough. That changes everything. You need to understand that calibration process. And I think included in it as well, Kurt, with that calibration is the people, to Jeremiah's comment, the people that are running that equipment. How are they reacting to false positives that are coming off the line? How are they taking those samples over for investigation? How often are those type of things coming up? And to the comments as well in here, if you're getting this foreign material coming in from your suppliers, how are you then making sure that you're reducing that? Because if you can reduce that burden coming into your plant relative to foreign material, that means that your equipment's going to perform much better as well.
Absolutely. And I noticed in one of the comments, there, and it really kind of ties to what all you guys have been saying, is that, or actually a couple of comments. One, there was about the need to do a true foreign material risk assessment. We've all been around this food safety thing for a long time, and we tend to do microbiological risk assessments, tend to do chemical risk assessments, but there's also the opportunity to do the foreign material risk assessment, because obviously you build all of these type of things into the plan. And one of the other comments that was made was, is really the type of equipment that's being used, or the type of gaskets and those kind of things that are used in the equipment, and the quality of those. And we've had a couple of customers that have really become a bit aggressive with their approach to the business, where you're looking at those type of things, whether it's gaskets or any kind of ancillary add-on to the equipment, as part of their maintenance program. As they start to look at it, they start to look and say, okay, is this gasket, because eventually something's going to happen, you're going to have a gasket that gives, is the gasket actually something that you can find via x-ray when it does crack? And if it doesn't, then there's the opportunity to go back and work with your procurement team, to work with your maintenance team, to start up in the level or up in the quality of the gaskets, or those type of things that are in your process, so that in the event something does occur, because it will at some point in time, that you actually have products in your system that can be recovered via x-ray when the time is right. So those are just some opportunities to look at from this standpoint. Any of you other guys got any feedback on that before we move on with some of the other questions?
Yeah, Kurt, I was looking at the comments, and similar to what Brian noted, I don't think we can discount the adage that we have to continually reinforce with our processes and the folks in the process, that we can't expect good outcomes without good inputs. And a lot of the comments are talking about things I brought in to process, regardless of what our industry specifically or the finished product is. we all have inputs, and whether that input is down the hall from a sister facility, from a supplier, an approved supplier, or somewhere halfway across the world, we have to assess and do the best we can on those inputs. I get the privilege to speak at some of our business process, whether that is SAP or whatever the technology is that we use for our processes in our business, for accounting, traceability, things like that. And one of the things that I continually stress is while the system, whatever it may be, will do great things and nearly perform miracles that we didn't think was possible when we were using a big chief tablet to write everything down and transfer. And at the end of the day, the outputs are still only going to be as good as the inputs. And that inspection process, that supplier approval, that supplier performance monitoring, all of those things are extremely important. And I kind of see that comment or that trend through comments with folks struggling in what comes in to them to be processed that they think otherwise is ready to go. The other comment I would make, I saw a comment about production belt material, and I think it's a good place to talk about innovation in terms of processing and equipment. It's important that we have a continuous improvement mindset for even if it's not detection technology, but how we convey something from X to Y to Z. We had an example at Tyson several years ago where we wanted to get rid of, in this case, it was a metal belt for processing a specific product that we had that needed to be stretched out and elongated. And they wanted to move to a solid shaker setup. And I said, well, that will never work. I've been doing this for 20 years, and you cannot process this product without metal belt. Well, sure enough, there are 3 lines with shakers that are conveying this product that break and are one piece and don't shed. And so I would encourage the team to try it. Right, the conventional wisdom with what we've known in the past is maybe not what we know today. If the regulatory landscape changes, which it has, then our processes need to change along with it. And we have to be willing to try some of those things.
Yep. Great. And I noticed there's been a couple of comments. You mentioned it, and all the panelists have actually mentioned this, is, what you're bringing into the process is really how you control things, and that's through taking a look at what's going on from a supplier standpoint. And it is interesting, when you watch food safety evolve over the years, there are a lot of companies have got pretty detailed supplier programs around microbiological and chemical specifications, and we're starting to see that now occur along with foreign material as well. So it's just really kind of the evolution of the overall food safety culture of what's going on in the marketplace. I did see that there's a question here about food safety culture, and we will get into that a little bit later. And I also saw that there were a couple of comments around certain sizes of gaskets or certain sizes of different products that can be found. A lot of that goes back to the conversation around the calibration of the equipment. And it really depends on the density of the product matrix that you're looking for, and within the density of the product matrix that you're looking for, now you're also having to consider the density of the contaminant, and that's really the ratio that it enables you to be able to see things via X-ray. The question there was 2 millimeter gasket within a certain type of product. Typically, you're going to be able to see a 2 millimeter gasket in that type of product if it's, like I mentioned earlier, if it's a higher density gasket versus a very low density or a gasket that doesn't hold up as well in the process. So also saw a question there, and I think this is one for the entire panel, because I'm looking at this from a third party X-ray service, and what is an acceptable reject rate, and there's all kind of variables that go into that. So I'll try not to answer that. But there's a question there about what is a false reject rate when you're looking at in-line equipment. that would be recommended as best in class. Does anybody have any specific feedback on that? Brian or Jeremiah or anybody?
I would actually recommend working with your equipment vendor on that topic. They should be able to help you navigate those questions.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I would say, Kurt, there, and I put a reply in the chat. There's so many variables in terms of line speed, aperture, as Brian mentioned, and other things. To Jeremiah's point, it's really about being competitive with the vendors in that space to get the most you can for your investment, and looking at your process specifics, and then really drilling down with those vendors on what a no BS capability in your setup is to maximize what you have. So I think it would be probably erroneous for us to give numbers without knowing processes and speeds and things like that. But that is a burden that your vendors must bear as they compete for your capital.
Yeah. And to kind of tack on what Matt was saying there as well, Kurt, is the piece of equipment itself. Is it a brand new piece of equipment? Is it something your engineering guys bought used? Has it been moved in from another plant? That entire maintenance history of that piece of machinery that could greatly impact your form material creation.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so now we're going to move on and kind of change what we're talking about just a bit, and let's talk a little bit more about how we respond to a form material incident. So Brian, you coming back to you with the work that you've done with your customers, what are some of the things that you see as being critical factors when you're starting to do root cause analysis around form material programs?
Yeah, absolutely, Kurt. So I think number one is don't jump to conclusions. A lot of times we'll see something and there's a foreign material investigation that's initiated, and everybody goes, oh yeah, well yeah, we've had this problem before. We know exactly where that's coming from. Well, number one, why is this recurring? And number two, are you sure? We've all been in those type of situations. So building out a robust investigational process, bringing in that multidisciplinary team where you're bringing in the maintenance team and engineering, the operators, so that everybody has input into this, because things change and it may not be the same instance that you had before. The other second piece of that, Kurt, that I would look at as well is make sure that you're properly blocking the incident. Do you have all of the material? Are you sure? Because you don't want any of that getting out into the marketplace and causing more problems than you had. So can I recover it? Where did it come from? And are we sure that this was the source of that material?
Great. All right, along the same lines, Jeremiah, when you guys, knock on wood, hope it doesn't happen very often, but when or if it happens, when you discover that you've got some type of foreign material contamination, what when you first find that out, what's the most critical thing that you guys do within your process?
Ooh, it's hard to name one critical piece, but to sum it up in one word is you have to react to it. So whether it is foreign material that's found at a known control or an inline detection. So if you find a piece of metal at a metal detector, are you investigating it? Or if you are finding just random foreign material in your process, you have to react to it. If you have, like going back to the belt discussion, you might have a known risk with your belting material. So you might have established periodic checks of that belt to see if you have missing pieces. If you find a missing piece, you don't have known foreign material, but you have the potential. You have to react to it. So that reaction, getting the right people involved to be part of that investigation. Brian mentioned getting your arms around it. A good rule would be to start big and then justify your window to be smaller. So start your window larger, and then through further justification of an investigation, you can possibly get that window smaller. And also possibly creating tools to help your team through this process, like through whether it be forms that you're creating, or there's a lot of technology out there too that you can use and leverage to help capture that investigation and help guide the team through all of the necessary questions that they need to answer. Because it all comes down to justifying your decisions, whether it be justifying your production window or justifying determining the root cause and justifying the corrective actions that you're going to take on that window.
Yeah. And I think it's a great point when you're talking about, the justification of the decision, because, historically, before the X-ray machines were available, as available as they are today, before the third-party services like we provide at FlexRay, a lot of times the decision was that we have to landfill the product. We have to trash the product. Now the technologies are there that are enabling customers like yourself and those on the call here to find other options where we're not having to landfill the product. And if you think about what's going on in in the world today around sustainability goals and waste reduction and all these things, utilizing the technologies around to address those is certainly key, and it leads to, like you said, the justification of the decision, because I think those kind of things are having a much bigger impact than in the past. Matthew, along the same lines of this response, an incident occurs, there's a problem, you go through, you're building your case and you're doing your justification. What's important when it comes to the documentation of the steps that you're taking in the process?
Yeah, I would coach and do coach my team and coach others that the most important thing when we're documenting is to be really, really deliberate about what you're putting on the documentation. I encourage our folks to be storytellers when it comes to a foreign material incident and the investigation. If someone else besides those involved in the direct investigation are looking at this documentation, can they deduce what happened in the decision that was made as a result? A lot of us do a really good job of saying we found this foreign material at this time in this location, but that's a very, very small morsel of the story. I encourage our teams to document the quote unquote exhaustive nature of what they looked at in the investigation, even if the things that they document weren't an attributing factor to what happened. If you examine the line front to back, we need to say that. We need to talk about the equipment that we examined and how we came to the decisions that we did. And I think Brian and Jeremiah both put it well, that the why and how we got to this space and what it looks like and why we're making the decisions that we're making. And so understanding that someone, whether that be a customer, someone else in the organization, or unfortunately at times a regulatory body, are going to look at these documents, and there needs to be no question about what happened in the investigation and what steps took place. Two other parts of that, I think it's important to document who was a part of the investigation to give some credence to what we're doing, whether that be maintenance, engineering, FSQA, or an independent third party that's on the team, right? Whether that be someone that's not usually involved, like an HR or a nursing, or someone with an extra set of eyes to the process that we brought in to double check our work. The last thing that I would encourage everyone to do in terms of documentation is close the loop in terms of product disposition, corrective actions, or preventative measures. A lot of times we know that we have to take some maintenance steps, or we have to do some things when processes are down, or we have to do some things right now, but we also have to do some things later. Come back and document and close that loop and say, yes, we did complete this on this date at this time with this work order number, or this piece of equipment, or this receipt, or this serial number, or whatever that may be, so that there's no question that we said we were going to do some of these things in the future to get better. Did we actually do them? It's so important to circle back around and come and close that loop on some of those items.
Absolutely. Great. All right. A lot of really good questions coming in. We'll hold some of those unless they directly tie to the conversation we're having right now, but we'll hold some of these and answer these a bit later on. Brian, let's talk a little bit now about, how do we resolve, product being on hold? What do we do when product's there? And so when you think about, the ROI of a remediation approach, whether it's landfilling the product, utilizing a third-party service to recover as much of the product as possible, or even, trying to rework internally, based upon, limitations of labor or whatever else may be there. How do you, with the people you work with, how do you look at determining what their ROI is?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great question, Kurt. So part of this is really what, oh, there we are. So part of this is really, this goes back to what Jeremiah was talking about, is to be sure that you're actually capturing what's going on with a particular issue. You're putting a rather large block of product on hold, and then you're bringing that down in size through your investigation. So internally in companies, you're normally going to have a conversation. The food safety QA teams are saying, hey, we need to do everything we're talking about today. The operations guys are saying, well, come on, we have orders that we need to fill. What's going on here? So you have this pressure and this dynamic that's taking place in this organization relative to this. And as we all know within quality, everything that's going through a process, you're increasing the cost of non-quality associated with that through that process. So the farther you get along, the more expensive it is. And I know from my past experience, if I had an event and I wanted to your point, Kurt, maybe one of my remediations is I'm going to take that product and run it back through the X-ray machines to see if I can find any other additional foreign material in that product. Well, what does that mean? That means I'm increasing my labor. I probably have to do this during downtime on the weekend. It also means that I'm not running other products. So I'm also taking up line time and valuable assets to deal with that. So maybe a better solution is to potentially landfill this product or look for outside sources that can then also help me with this issue to allow me to continue production and to have a successful investigation without impeding on the operational necessities of that manufacturing facility.
Right. And Jeremiah, obviously, anytime you have an incident, they have their own unique set of circumstances. Things happen. And when you're looking at those, how does an overall risk analysis really factor into the next steps that you're taking with an incident?
Yeah. So obviously risk is already there because we've had an event and we've determined there's potential foreign material risk associated with this product. So then it really just comes down what remediation factors can we do to make the product acceptable. And like Brian was saying, it would be an internal evaluation of what controls we have internally to address the known contaminant. Will our controls address it or not? Or do we need to look for outside help to do that? And most of the time we're going to do everything we can to make that product acceptable. But there are times that there are no remediation factors, and there's based off of the contaminant, there's no possibly way to detect for it and remove it, and we have to make those decisions as well.
Okay.
But I did see somebody asked a question around 0.8 millimeters or lower, and unfortunately, from a regulatory perspective, there's no standard like that. So we do, if you have a potential adulterant in your product, based off of a known event, there's no limit like that. There's no size limit to address that adulterant. If it's there and it shouldn't be there, it's considered adulterated.
And in Matthew, thinking along these same lines, resolving the situation, when you think about how to move forward with a contamination situation, what are the top, let's say, 3 things that you would rank in terms of importance for moving forward?
Yeah, I think moving forward in terms of product disposition, one, Jeremiah hit it right on the head, right? At the end of the day, food safety has to come first. And probably 1A2 or 1B in that same category is the regulatory burden that we're all under in producing food, whether that be USDA, FDA, wildlife fisheries, whatever that may be, right? Alcohol, tobacco, firearms, whatever that may be. But making that decision, I agree with Jeremiah, is really about the risk and can whatever we're doing in terms of remediation, whether that be technology, inspection, whatever that may be, can it allay that risk? Can it mitigate that risk? And that's really more important in terms of allaying the risk than any size measurement could be. That's really where the discussion goes. I think number two in moving forward is making sure we have a solid corrective action and preventative plan. We don't want to revisit the same mistake over and over. If that mistake is implied or otherwise, whether we caused it or whether it simply happened to us in an unforeseen space, have we done the due diligence to limit to the best of our ability the frequency of that happening again and the risk associated with that failure? And then lastly, in part that we that is so important that sometimes gets skipped over in the heat of trying to decide product disposition and the financial piece and the regulatory piece for that matter, is we really, really have to make sure that all the folks in our operation understand what happened and do a dive into and make sure that everyone's aware from a training aspect what happened, what we're going to do moving forward, and how they play a role in making sure that foreign material doesn't continue to proliferate in our operation. Everyone, regardless of how small the incident is, has a role to play in terms of follow-up, and whether that be simply say something, see something, say something, whether that be an actual inspection, whether that be taking care of the equipment, or encouraging your team to move forward with the culture that so many comments have talked about in terms of food safety culture. Everybody has a role to play. We have to circle back, and whether that be in a food safety team meeting, sometimes we call it pass on, shift to shift, whatever that may be, we have to tell that story.
Great feedback. Kind of a general question to all you guys as a panelist. When you look at, and Brian and Jeremiah, I think both of you guys specifically mentioned this, when you're looking at your process and you're dealing with an incident and you're looking at potentially reworking versus utilizing a third party, like us at FlexRay, what are some of the main decision criteria that you use to compare and contrast, whether you're doing it internally versus externally, and maybe the benefits of both?
For us, it comes down to, we've had folks, myself included, visit the Flex X-ray facilities and look at your process, and it's a part of the investigation of how you all run your process and your technology versus how we do an inline technology or anything that we may have offline. Even down to the point of do we need an automatic rejection, or is this something that we need to see on the screen and determine size and scope and type as we go, or is this a known contaminant or unknown, or what are all those things, the factors? But I think understanding what your third party does and their process is critical to knowing if that's something you want to do. And again, that's outside of the cost and time and all that. But will their process execute to what you need it to do for your investigation and the outcome that you desire? So sometimes it can't. I would tell you, as a rule of thumb, when you look at our processes, we have a lot of inline detection equipment that we run at speed of production, and we don't necessarily alter sensitivity or try to dial in at an exact level outside of what we expect for the product and the product type every day. You know, it fits our risk analysis for what we believe and have seen to happen in each one of our processes. If we get something outside of that, then we need to look at what our third party can do in their process, and will that help allay some of that risk.
Great. Okay.
And I wanted to build really quickly on what Matt was saying, because there's a couple of really important things that he was saying in there. So implicitly in what we're talking about today is building these relationships in advance. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be digging through the internet trying to find somebody to help you through this issue in the middle of an issue. You need to build these relationships out in advance. You need to understand those risks. And as Jeremiah was talking about as well, is have that third, that extra pair of eyes who are looking at that equipment and coming in and touring your plant and looking at your different defensive measures you have in place for foreign material and providing suggestions on how you can potentially make it better.
Great. Great. All right, so we've got about 13 minutes left here, and I want to try to leave close to 10 minutes or so to answer some of the Q&A questions that are there. But one of the things that's been mentioned in some of the comments, and I think all of you guys have mentioned it, has really been around food safety culture and how we build foreign material evaluation into our food safety culture. So could each of you guys maybe give me the 30-minute or 30-minute, we don't have that, the 30-second elevator speech on how you guys look at building your foreign material review into your food safety culture at the company you're with?
I can start this one, and I could talk 30 minutes about it, maybe even 30 hours, because it's such an important topic. But again, we've been talking about risk a lot here, and we haven't really talked about that human element that is associated with our process, whether it be executing the controls that we have established or from the possible introduction of foreign material as well. But I guess in the 30-second spirit, we know that we need to embrace this. I think all of us do. Getting down to getting our team members to want to do the right thing and to be engaged in the process and what they're doing. Some of the things that we do at Hormel is we do have what we call our cultural beliefs. So safety first and speak up are two of our foundational cultural elements, and we do a lot of training and reinforcement and engagement around those two topics.
Great.
Yeah, I would build on what Jeremiah is saying in terms of we approach it at Tyson Foods in terms of world-class safety. And safety is not only a part of the manufacturing operation, but it's also a part of taking care of our people. And we're consumers of our product. And to take care of each and every one of us, we have to make sure, and it goes back to the inputs that we're giving to our folks, our families, and our community are foreign material free. And so really tying all that together, it's not just about lockout, tag out. It's not just about confined space. Foreign material and food safety fits right into that hand in hand. And if we don't think it does, we're not paying attention. The human element is critical to what Jeremiah said. We have to make sure in our food safety culture and our training and our team meetings and all those things that every single person knows that they matter and they have a spot in the food safety journey. They're not all making product disposition decisions. They're not all turning wrenches, myself included. But we all have a part to play. And talking about what that part is and how they fit into that puzzle is critical.
Right.
Yeah, because absolutely, and what Matt and Jeremiah are saying here is 100% correct. Because I used to tell people in my plants is the bottom line is the machines don't make the product, we do. It's the people on the lines who are making the product. If you don't believe that, go to a plant that has the exact same machinery that your plant has that doesn't have a good culture in place. You're going to get radically different results. So building that relationship and really focusing in, because as food safety professionals, we can be some places, but we can't be everywhere. And we need to build and instill that food safety culture and understand that relationship between a supervisor and his team that's where everything begins. They're on the floor, they're managing everything day in, day out. Just like Matt said, they're working, they're turning the wrenches, they're making all of this happen. And we need to help them and give them the tools that they need so that we have a good food safety culture. And saying I always used to tell my quality managers is, if you can't go out on the floor, take any product off of the line, take it home, prepare it, and feed it to your grandchildren, I want to know about it.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. So we're now about 9 minutes from the end. These are, we've addressed most of the questions that we had submitted prior to our roundtable today. And we've got a lot of good questions that are in the comments. So I'd like to take the next few minutes and give us an opportunity to address those. I'll take the first one because there's one specific to me in there, and it's and that question is from my perspective, have we been able to guarantee zero risk when it comes to screening a food product, for a known event? And I can tell you, we can't say zero risk. It goes back to the thing around the FDA requirements kind of things. I'm a microbiologist by trade, and I liken foreign material inspection processes to science in general. And there's nothing exact in science, and there's nothing guaranteed in science. As much as we want there to be, there's just not. But what we can do is through the evaluation process of products, and that's what we typically do when we're working with the customers. We'll have products sent in along with a contaminant. If you've got the contaminant, if you don't, we have seeds that we can run, and then we'll evaluate that product with our seeds or with your contaminant, breaking it down to as small a size as we can see. And we will tell you that we can see that contaminant within your product up to a 99% repeatability if we can see it. Sometimes we have to take the product out of the case to do that. Sometimes it's in the case. There were times that we would not run a project at FlexRay if we did not have that 99% repeatability. We've now started working with our customers. I see Matt shaking his head because he knows this, but we've started working with some of our customers, and Jeremiah too, that we'll go to a customer and we'll say, hey, we're not seeing this thing 99% of the time, 99% repeatability, but we are seeing about 88, 89% repeatability. And so then as a customer, you're able to make a risk-based decision. Maybe it's the type of product, maybe it's the target consumer for that type of product. And do you still feel good about it? If you got the 88, 89% repeatability moving forward with a project, knowing that there's some risk, that's a risk-based decision for the customer to be able to make. So that's the first question that I had there. So I hope I answered that the way you were expecting us to do that. There's another question here. It's like, how do we ensure that we've recovered all foreign material where it would be deemed acceptable for release into commerce? I think I addressed it from the standpoint of a third party being FlexRay. Again, I don't know that you can always say that you've recovered all foreign material, because it's due to the inexact science. But maybe guys, you've got some feedback on how you look at that internally with you're looking from an inline perspective.
Yeah, I think our approach to a lot of incidents isn't always can we recover it all. It's more so based off of what we know and with the contaminant, the size, structure, all that type of stuff. Are we comfortable with a screening method or an intervention to deem the product acceptable? So that's more how we approach that thought process is the confidence level in the screening versus actually retrieving it all.
Yeah, and I would agree, Kurt. I think the assumption in there, and I think it is a gross assumption a lot of times, is that we fully understand how much is missing. Do we know for sure how much is missing? And if so, do we know with enough certainty to try to quantify it on the back end? I think a lot of times we give ourselves too much credit to fully understand what's missing and try to put that quantity 1 + 1 = 2 we may not know one of those factors when we start out in the investigation or when we're looking at product disposition.
Yeah. Okay. I'll say there's another question there about your best practice for X-ray metal detector verification and validation at the plant to make sure it's meeting failure rates. Matt, addressed that earlier on to an extent. That really is a conversation with the inline manufacturer and what they do and how they calibrate their equipment. The one thing that I think it's important is the equipment, the calibration of the equipment is somewhat, or my understanding is somewhat very specific to the type of product being ran. So if you're running one type of product, you got to calibrate to that product, and then you got to calibrate to the next product. Because if you dial it in too tight on one particular type of product, and Jeremiah, I think you said this earlier, if you dial it in too specifically, or if you dial it in specifically, then you're gonna run a chance of missing contaminants in other type of products, because now you're not dialed in specifically to those type of products. So those are the kind of conversations you have to have with your third-party vendor around the calibration and validation. One other question that I saw, or another question I saw out there, and it was around dual energy, utilizing dual energy inline machines, and what does that mean in terms of being able to see certain sizes of product and being able to see products that within different matrices. Do any of you guys have any feedback on that? How utilizing those dual energy machines may help you find some of the more difficult things in line, like plastics, rubbers, and those kind of things?
I think the rule of thumb would be, and I know somebody, and I'm going to couple some of that, Kurt, with what it talked about. Someone asked about low density material like rubber and plastic. I think the more power, and by power I mean the more technology coupled together in terms of your detection system, the better chance you have at finding not only low density but smaller items with your technology. So when you start talking about vision and AI and dual energy, and as some of these things can marry together with their powers combined, for lack of a better term, you do get some cumulative effect on what you can see, quote unquote, see, and what the technology can't. Again, there's a lot of specifics into what that looks like, but much like any other risk assessment with technology for your process, you'll need to look at what dual energy does versus others. But I would tell you a general rule is the more effective technologies you bring together in that singular piece to make that rejection or accept decision, usually the better efficacy that you have at more specific and smaller and different types of material.
Okay. Well, and I think to kind of build on what Matt's saying here too is, so part of this, and this is where it's really good having different sets of eyes looking at issues, because let's say, for example, you're looking at bringing in an extremely expensive piece of machinery to help you mitigate this potential foreign material risk. Well, maybe you should be changing the foreign material itself. So if the maintenance department is buying, to your point earlier, Kurt, really cheap gaskets that are flaking off into the product, well, maybe your money's better spent in buying a high quality gasket instead.
Yep. Great. Well, we're at the top of the hour, at the end of our conversation. I know there's a few questions here that we did not get answered. Justine, Brianna, Lisa, there's several out there. We will try to circulate those questions to our panelists here and get some feedback on those, and we can send you some specific information back on that. But before we sign off, I'd like to thank all of you panelists for participation. This has been great. I think it's been very enlightening for me to hear how some of you guys do that, and I hope our attendees have gotten the same benefit. And attendees, thank you very, very much. We do these things because we feel like it's important. to continue this whole journey around foreign material like we have around some of the other sciences. And we just really appreciate your interest in your team. Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing this.
You guys have a great day.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you all.